how far is it to this same blessed Milford? And by the way, tell me how Wales was made so happy to inherit such a haven. Well, so wrote William Shakespeare in Act 2, Scene 3 of Cymbeline. And of course he was referring to this magnificent stretch of water that cuts so deeply into the hinterland of Pembrokeshire and around which there is so much history. This is really a classic example of a drowned valley that was flooded after the sea levels rose after the last ice age, creating one of the most wonderful, deep natural harbours in the world. You know, it's virtually impossible to go anywhere around the edge of this waterway without stumbling across some aspect of history. We know, for instance, that in the winter of 854, the Viking chieftain Habba over-sheltered here in one of the small pills off the main haven that could accommodate his fleet of 23 ships. That was a pretty formidable force at that time, and goodness only knows what kind of havoc they caused all around these coastlines. The term mill appears in so many place names around here, and it was at Mill Bay in 1485 that Henry Tudor landed with 2,000 men and then began the journey that culminated in the history-changing Battle of Bosworth. And it was during that campaign that Ddraig Goch was first raised. And some 80 years earlier, about 2,000 French mercenaries landed not too far away and joined forces with Owain Glyndŵr, and together they laid waste to Haverfordwest and Pembroke town and castle. The strategic importance of this area was not lost on Oliver Cromwell, and it was from these shores that he launched his brutal invasion of Ireland in 1649. So this glorious haven has witnessed a great deal of warlike activities, but it was towards the end of the 18th century that started a new phase, a much more peaceful phase of development, with the establishment of the new town and ultimately the docks. And this really was down to the drive and energy of these two men, Sir William Hamilton and Charles Francis Greville. It was Charles Francis Greville who was the real powerhouse for driving Milford Haven forward. It was he who made contact with Quakers from Nantucket Island in New England in the USA, and within a few years families had arrived here in Milford Haven and built those rather delightful cottages just on the hill behind me. Those whaling families, through their hard work, great skills, terrific business acumen, quickly became very good members and very effective members of this burgeoning community. And so very quickly names like Starbuck, Folger and Roach became very familiar in and around this developing town. The influence of those early Americans can be seen so very clearly by the fact that this town is laid out on a grid pattern. They were granted permission in 1811 to build their own meeting house alongside their private burial ground, and this is a very special building because there are very few of the original Quaker meeting houses left, and this is a particularly good example. There's a lovely entry dated the 1st of March 1811 in the diary of Abigail Folger, in which she describes this place as a snug, neat thing, and she spells neat, N-E-E-T. The Quakers were not new in Pembrokeshire by any means in the 18th century. They'd been present for over 200 years in the county. The Quakers are also called the Religious Society of Friends, and in addition to their religious beliefs, they're known for their pacifism, social justice, and equality. They have neither creed or clergy. Their beliefs often brought them into direct conflict with the authorities, so much so that Daniel Starbuck, he refused to pay church tithes, and so he had some of his goods distrained. The Quakers who worshipped here came to this building and were so very, very important in the establishment of the whaling industry. But it was an industry that was relatively short-lived because, of course, its main product was whale oil used for lighting, and with the advent and the increasing use of coal gas, so their markets decreased. It's great. I had no idea this was going to be here, but it's a lovely quote by Waldo Williams, who worshipped here in this very building, where he says, "When the war began, we declared against taking any part of it," and so much part and parcel of the character of, he was quite a remarkable man. Well, it's been such a pleasure to visit this building and to be able to actually get inside, and we are very grateful to the Society of Friends for giving us permission to do so. I just love buildings like this because it makes the life of a local historian that much easier. You don't have to worry about researching when it was built because all the information is there written on front of the building. It's the Custom House, 1797, and it was also a whale oil store. But it still has a very important function today because it now accommodates the most excellent Milford Haven Museum. This is such a smashing museum. It really is quite superb. And I'm delighted to be here with one of the volunteers. Gerald, when was the museum opened?
Actually, down on this site, since about the late 1980s, where it was taken over and all refurbished, which we do every year anyhow now. But I believe the late 80s.
And so, who runs the museum?
We're all volunteers. I think there's about only something like 20 of us.
Now, I was very interested in your surname. Where did that come from?
Grandfather came across early 1900s with a fishing, married local and settled in Milford then. And he got lost during the Second World War off the coast of Ireland, strafed, they believe, by a German bomber. All hands lost. Which there was a lot of casualties, sort of the Second World War, but it was the older men kept the fishing going. The like sort of older trawlers, because all the newer trawlers were all requisitioned for minesweeping by the Navy.
Well, that was absolutely terrific. You know, in making this film about Milford Haven, we can really only just scratch the surface. But if you want to find out much more about the history of this fascinating town, this is the place to visit. It really is a terrific museum. The Custom House was designed by a Swansea architect, William Jernigan, and it's thought that he was also responsible for the design of this building, a very important building in the history of Milford Haven. This was originally called the New Inn, but it was renamed after the visit of Lord Horatio Nelson, who came here in August 1802. He was, of course, accompanied by the beautiful Lady Emma Hamilton, who was his mistress at the time. She was married to Sir William Hamilton, but she'd also been involved with Sir Charles Greville, William Hamilton's nephew. Nothing quite like keeping it in the family. After the decline of whaling, there were great hopes for the future of the establishment of a Royal Naval dockyard. But that, alas, was short-lived with the opening of the large-scale dockyard across the water in Pembroke Dock. A series of forts were built in the mid-19th century to protect the naval dockyard. And this one here at Hubberston, and we can just see the top of the fort just behind us, behind all the undergrowth. That was built in 1863 at the then staggering cost of £55,000. And this is another remnant of the 19th century. It's the Haking Observatory that was built in 1809. It was intended to be part of a complex for the study of navigation and mathematics, but with the death of its founder, Sir Charles Greville, it never materialized. There are some great names associated with this town, and one of the greatest in both maritime history and size was the Great Eastern. Isambard Kingdom Brunel's massive ship that he fondly referred to as his Great Babe made several visits to the haven. There were few places that could accommodate the Great Eastern. It displaced 22,500 tons and was 693 feet long. It was by far and away the largest ship afloat at the time. She first docked just off Nayland after her maiden voyage to New York in 1860. And there's a lovely article in the Pembrokeshire Local History Society journal in which the author writes about the passengers who were on that epic journey. And I'm delighted to see that one of them was a wizard and improvisator whose name was Wizard Jacob, and he was accompanied by his brother under the marvellous name of Goblin Sprightly. The ship attracted so many visitors that special trains were laid on. And there was one occasion when 1,100 people came from Merthyr Tydfil. So many arriving at one time, of course, that they couldn't find accommodation for them, and so they had to stay out overnight. And amazingly, her longest stay in the area was when she was berthed in Milford docks for 11 years from 1875 onwards, undergoing repairs. Her length of sojourn was a source of concern because her sheer size was impeding the development of that part of the docks. The dream was that Milford would become one of the most important international ports, but that never materialized. But it was towards the end of the 19th century that saw the development of another important period of prosperity of the town. It was the arrival of the steam trawler Sybil in 1888 that really kick-started the fishing industry, and for getting on for 100 years, Milford was consistently in one of the top 5 of important fishing ports in Britain. This place now in the 25th century has changed almost out of recognition. And now we have this very active marina and new shops and new businesses. But when fishing was the prime driver in this port, there were so many other trades and industries dotted all the way around this harbour. And I came across a wonderful list. And here we go. You had ice makers, porters, merchants, net makers and braiders, fish box makers, provisioners, fish gutters and cleaners, and of course all those who were involved with the actual transportation of fish. This really was Fish Town with a vengeance. It was in the mid-20th century that the town went through another phase of development. That took place after the so-called Suez Crisis, and the haven then became one of the main centres in Britain for the importation of oil. Evidently, the depth of the haven was absolutely critical for the draft of the big ocean-going super tankers, and just a few metres shallower, and it's likely that the oil industry wouldn't have happened. Milford Haven is still vitally important because over 20% of Britain's natural gas comes in via this waterway. So this amazing seascape and landscape has provided the background to so much history and centuries of human endeavour.